She married the human to save her people, then witnessed his astounding power in battle. The people of Selara had lived in peace for generations, but now war had come to their doorstep. She could hear the distant roar of engines and the hum of distant ships in orbit. The council members sat in silence, all of them waiting for her decision. They looked to their queen, but she felt trapped. Every choice she could make seemed like a choice to lose something precious. "Your Majesty," one counselor said, his voice shaking slightly, "our forces are too small, the enemy is too strong. We cannot fight them and survive." He looked down at the polished floor, unwilling to meet her eyes. Others murmured in agreement. Lyra nodded slowly. She had heard their words before, but they still sank like heavy stones in her chest. She knew they were right. Selara was not ready for this kind of war. The enemy had fleets that moved like shadows across space, attacking suddenly and without mercy. The Selaran forces were strong on land, but their ships were slow and their weapons weak compared to what was coming. Lyra's mind raced. The traditions of her people offered very few solutions. She had studied the ancient texts, hoping for guidance, but nothing spoke of what to do when the enemy was too strong. Then she remembered something old, something almost forgotten. It was a law that spoke of uniting with an off-world champion. It was rarely used and considered dangerous. Many of the council members had spoken against it in the past, but now it seemed like the only way to save her people. The thought of it made Lyra shiver. It meant marriage, a union with someone she had never met, someone not from Selara, someone human. She stood and looked at the council. "We have one chance," she said softly, but her voice carried in the quiet hall. "We must find a human, one who can help us survive. It is the law, and it may be our only hope." The council fell silent. The human worlds were far, and the humans were known as weak traders and diplomats, not warriors. But some records spoke of humans with great strength and skill, men who could survive situations that would kill a Selaran instantly. One name appeared in the oldest records, Daniel Brooks. His deeds were legendary, though the records were few and scattered. No one knew exactly what he looked like or where he was now. Some said he had left his world for other systems, others said he was in hiding, but if anyone could help Selara, it was him. Lyra took a deep breath. "We must send a message. We must ask him to come." Her voice was firm now, hiding the fear that churned inside. The council members began to move, sending messengers to reach the distant human worlds. They worked quickly, using every means available. It would take time for a human to arrive, but Lyra knew that every day counted. She spent her hours preparing, thinking about what she might say to him, wondering if he would agree. The thought of marrying someone she did not know made her stomach twist, but it was nothing compared to the thought of watching her people die. Days passed slowly. Lyra walked through the gardens of the palace, watching the strange plants sway in the wind. She tried to calm her mind, but it was impossible. She watched the skies for signs of the enemy, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Finally, a message arrived. It was short, but it carried hope. Daniel Brooks had agreed to come. He said he would arrive as soon as possible. Lyra felt a mix of relief and fear. She had no idea what kind of man he was, only what the records had said. Some said he was quiet, some said he was brave, some said he had survived impossible battles. No one knew for sure. She would have to trust him, and trust was not easy for her. When Daniel arrived, he came quietly, without fanfare. The palace guards led him to Lyra's chamber, where she waited. She studied him carefully. He was tall, with strong shoulders and calm eyes. He did not look like a hero from the stories, but there was a presence about him, a quiet strength that made her heart beat faster. He bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I am here to help." Lyra nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. She did not know if she could trust him, but she knew she had no choice. Her people's survival depended on it. The marriage ceremony was simple. Selara's traditions were strict, but the council agreed to a shortened version, given the urgency. Lyra felt strange as she exchanged vows with a man she barely knew. She looked at Daniel's eyes and saw determination, but no emotion. It was strange to marry someone for duty and survival, but Lyra forced herself to focus on the task. She was not doing this for herself, she was doing it for her people. When the ceremony ended, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but another settled in its place. She had committed to a human, and she had committed to a future she did not yet understand. In the days that followed, Lyra watched Daniel closely. He learned quickly, observing the Celaran military and studying their strategies. He asked questions, but never in a way that seemed disrespectful. He seemed patient and thoughtful, taking time to understand the culture and the people. Lyra began to respect his intelligence, even if she did not yet trust him fully. She spoke with him often, sharing her fears and hopes. He listened quietly, offering advice when asked, but never boasting or trying to dominate. It was strange, Lyra thought, how a human could be so calm in a world on the edge of war. The enemy fleet continued to move closer. Scouts reported their numbers and their speed. Salara's defenses were prepared, but Lyra knew they were weak. She felt fear creep into her heart, fear that perhaps even Daniel could not save them. Yet every time she watched him work with the commanders, giving suggestions that seemed small but precise, she felt a spark of hope. He was different from what she expected. He was not like the other humans in the records who were traders or diplomats. He was something more, something stronger. One night, as they walked along the palace terraces, Lyra spoke quietly. "Daniel, I married you to save my people. I do not know you, and I do not know if I can trust you completely." He turned to her, his face calm in the moonlight. "Queen Lyra, I understand. You do what you must. I am here to do what I can. That is all I ask." His words were simple, but they carried weight. Lyra felt a strange respect for him, mixed with fear and relief. She had chosen a human to save her people, and now she could only wait to see if that choice was enough. Days became weeks. Daniel trained with the Celaran warriors, showing skill that surprised everyone. He moved with a precision and calmness that was unusual for humans. The soldiers began to look at him with respect instead of doubt. Lyra watched from a distance, amazed. She had thought humans were weak, but this human was not weak. He seemed to understand battle in a way no Celaran had ever taught. She felt a mixture of fear and hope. If the enemy came now, could they survive? She did not know, but she had begun to trust that Daniel might be their chance. Lyra spent many nights thinking about her decision. She had given her heart to duty, but she wondered about the man she had married. Daniel was quiet, polite, and always in control. She had seen no anger, no fear, no hesitation. It made her nervous. She wondered what he had faced before arriving on Celara. What battles had shaped him? She sensed a power within him, but she did not yet understand it. She could only watch and wait, knowing that the day of reckoning would come soon. One morning, scouts reported a new movement in space. The enemy fleet was closer than ever. The council gathered in emergency session. Lyra entered, her mind sharp and her will steady. She looked at Daniel, who stood beside her, calm as always. He spoke quietly. "Queen Lyra, we are ready. I will guide the forces, but we must act quickly." Lyra nodded. She had given her people a chance. Now it was time to see if that chance was enough. She did not know what would happen, but she felt the first spark of hope she had felt in weeks. With Daniel by her side, perhaps Celara could survive. The hours passed slowly. The sky above the planet darkened as enemy ships approached. Lyra stood on the palace balcony, watching the red glow of their engines. She thought of her people, of the warriors ready to fight, and of the human she had married. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She had chosen to fight, and she had chosen a partner who might be more than anyone expected. The future was uncertain, the danger real, and yet, for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt that survival was possible. The human named Daniel Brooks had come, and the story of Celara was about to change forever. Daniel moved through the palace halls with careful steps. He observed everything, the soldiers, the commanders, the council members, and even the servants. Everything had a rhythm, a pattern, and he tried to learn it quickly. He understood that in a world on the brink of war, even small mistakes could cost lives. Lyra watched him from a distance, noting how he did not seem nervous and how he seemed to understand things faster than anyone else. She had expected a human to be weak, unprepared, and perhaps frightened, but Daniel was none of those things. He was calm, patient, and precise. The soldiers did not trust him at first. They were strong, proud, and had lived their entire lives believing that humans were fragile. They mocked him quietly behind his back, calling him small and unworthy. Some whispered that the queen had made a foolish choice, that their people's survival could not rest on a human's shoulders. Daniel ignored them. He did not argue, he did not raise his voice, he simply worked. He observed their drills, offered small corrections, and demonstrated techniques that seemed simple but were effective. Slowly, the soldiers began to pay attention. They watched his movements, noticing how he avoided danger and how he read the battlefield before it even formed. It was unsettling for them, but it was also impressive. Lyra approached him one afternoon while he was watching a group of soldiers practice. "Daniel," she said softly, "do you really believe you can help them?" He turned to her, his eyes calm. "I do not need to believe, Queen Lyra. I need to act. If I can show them better ways, they will survive. If I cannot, then we will all fail together." Lyra nodded slowly. She did not always understand his words, but she could feel the truth in them. He was focused not on glory or reward, but on survival and results. She felt a strange respect and at the same time a small fear. Daniel was not like anyone she had known. There was a power in him, something she could not yet name. Days passed, and the enemy fleet drew closer. Scouts reported new movements and new ships arriving from distant systems. Celara's defenses were being tested, even without a full attack. Soldiers grew tired, nerves were stretched, and commanders argued over strategy. Lyra saw the tension building and knew that without Daniel's guidance, the situation could spiral into chaos. She summoned him to the command chamber, a high room filled with maps, lights, and communication devices. She watched him move through the room, calm among the chaos, as he studied the positions of the soldiers and ships. "We need to train them faster," Daniel said quietly, pointing to the map. "The front lines are strong, but if the enemy strikes here and here," he pointed to two weak points, "they will break through. We need a formation that adapts. Soldiers must know how to move quickly, retreat when needed, and strike together." Commanders looked at each other nervously. Some whispered that a human could not possibly know enough to advise them. But when Daniel began to demonstrate, showing movements and positions with quick sketches on the map, they started to understand. It was different from anything they had learned, but it made sense. It worked. Lyra watched quietly, impressed. She did not fully understand the strategy, but she saw the soldiers respond, their confidence growing. Daniel spoke to them without arrogance, without yelling, only teaching and showing. By the end of the day, the soldiers had learned new ways to defend, new ways to move, and new ways to act as a team. Even the veteran warriors admitted, quietly to themselves, that they had learned more in one day from this human than in years from Celaran instructors. Lyra felt a swell of hope in her chest. Perhaps they had a chance. At night, Lyra found herself walking alone in the palace gardens. Daniel joined her quietly without invitation. She did not ask him to leave. He had become a constant presence, steady and reliable. "I watch them," he said simply, "and I see fear, but fear can be used. It can make them stronger if they understand it." Lyra nodded. "You make it sound easy," she said, "but it is not. We have never faced an enemy like this." Daniel looked at her, his eyes calm and steady. "Nothing is easy in war, Queen Lyra, but preparation, training, and trust can make the impossible possible." She was quiet for a moment. She wanted to ask him about his past, about the things he had survived, but she did not. Some mysteries, she thought, were better left unknown. Over the next weeks, Daniel continued to teach. He trained small groups of soldiers in the palace grounds, showing them new ways to fight, move, and defend. He explained the importance of patience and observation, of using the environment to their advantage. Soldiers began to change under his guidance. They moved with more confidence, worked as a team, and stopped questioning him openly. Whispers turned to nods of approval. Even the commanders began to take his advice seriously, asking him to help plan small skirmishes at the borders. Lyra watched this transformation quietly. The human she had married, the one she had feared might be weak, was becoming the center of their hope. One day, as Daniel led a drill, a group of young soldiers struggled to follow his instructions. Frustration rose, and one of the older warriors raised his voice. Daniel stepped forward calmly, showing them again, moving slowly this time, demonstrating how to use timing and position. He did not shout, he did not scold, but he made them understand. The soldiers' frustration melted into focus. Lyra watched in amazement. She realized that Daniel's power was not just in strength, but in control. He could see the battlefield, the movement, and the timing before anyone else. He did not fight with anger or speed. He fought with understanding, and that made him dangerous to any enemy. Lyra felt herself learning from him as well. She spent hours with him in strategy sessions, asking questions and listening. He explained the importance of reading the enemy, of patience, and of timing. Lyra began to see the human way of thinking, and she realized it was different from the Celaran way. Humans were flexible, adaptable, and relentless. They could survive when others would fail. Lyra felt a strange mixture of awe and fear. She had married this man to save her people, but now she realized she might have married someone far stronger than she imagined. As the enemy fleet moved closer, small skirmishes began at the borders. Scouts reported attacks on supply lines and small settlements. Celera's forces responded but often struggled. Daniel was present at every report, quietly analyzing, giving advice, and sometimes personally leading small groups to defend. Soldiers began to see his methods work. They began to rely on him, to trust his instincts. Lyra watched from the palace towers, amazed at how calm he remained under pressure. She knew that when the real battle came, his presence would be the key to survival. One afternoon, Lyra spoke to him privately. "I married you to save my people," she said softly. "But now I see that I may have married someone far stronger than I imagined. I am not sure I can keep up with you." Daniel smiled faintly, not in arrogance but in understanding. "Queen Lyra, you do not need to keep up. You need to lead your people and trust me. We all have our roles. My strength is different from yours, but together we can protect Celera." She nodded. She felt a small weight lift. She realized that strength came in many forms and that perhaps she had made the right choice after all. The weeks of preparation continued. Soldiers moved with new formations, commanders began to trust each other, and scouts reported enemy movements more accurately. Daniel's presence became central to every plan. He worked quietly, never seeking praise, always focused on results. Lyra could see how the soldiers looked at him with respect, and how even the council began to ask his opinion on matters of defense. The human who had once seemed fragile was now the cornerstone of Celera's survival strategy. One night, a warning came from the scouts. A portion of the enemy fleet had been spotted near a mining settlement on the edge of Celera. It was a small target, but losing it could weaken morale and resources. Daniel moved quickly, preparing a team to defend it. Lyra offered to go with him. He shook his head gently. "Queen Lyra, your role is here, leading and inspiring. I will handle the field, trust me." She nodded reluctantly. She wanted to be by his side, but she understood his words. She would have to trust him completely. The skirmish at the mining settlement was small but revealing. Daniel moved with precision, directing soldiers and using the terrain to their advantage. Enemy forces were larger, but his planning and control allowed Celera's soldiers to repel them. Lyra received messages throughout the night, and by morning the settlement was secure. Reports praised Daniel's leadership, and for the first time, some soldiers whispered that perhaps humans were not as weak as they had believed. Lyra felt a surge of pride and relief. She had feared that this human might fail, but he had proven himself in the first test of battle. As dawn broke over Celera, Lyra watched the sky, thinking about the days ahead. The enemy fleet was still approaching, larger and stronger than ever. But for the first time, she felt a small spark of confidence. With Daniel by her side, she realized that survival might be possible. He had changed the soldiers, the commanders, and even her. He had brought hope where there had been only fear. She knew that the coming battles would be hard, dangerous, and perhaps deadly. But she also knew that the human she had married was unlike anyone she had ever known, and that his strength was more than just physical. It was something deeper, something she was only beginning to understand. The people of Celera slept that night, unaware of the strategies being prepared, unaware of the small victories that had changed their fate. Lyra walked through the palace gardens one last time before returning to her chambers. She passed Daniel, who was studying maps, planning movements, and observing reports. She felt a strange mix of awe, trust, and curiosity. She did not know what the future held, but she knew one thing. The human she had married was no ordinary man, and Celera's survival might depend on him more than anyone could imagine. The morning sky of Celera was pale orange, with distant clouds reflecting the rising sun. The air was tense, thick with anticipation. Scouts had reported that the enemy fleet was very close now. Lyra stood on the palace balcony looking over the city. She could see soldiers moving into position, ships being prepared, and civilians taking shelter. The city buzzed with activity, but beneath it was fear. Even with Daniel leading, the thought of facing the full force of the enemy made hearts tremble. Daniel walked beside Lyra, calm and silent. She looked at him, trying to understand how he remained so steady. He seemed almost untouchable by worry. "Queen Lyra," he said quietly, "fear is natural, do not fight it. Focus on your role, lead your people, and let me guide the soldiers." she nodded. It was difficult to watch thousands of lives hang in the balance, but she trusted him. She had no choice. The first real test was about to begin, and she needed to be strong for her people. The enemy arrived suddenly, a fleet of sleek ships moving like shadows. Their weapons glowed, ready to fire, and their soldiers were already descending on the outskirts. Alarms rang across the city. Lyra's stomach twisted. She had hoped the human speed and strength could match the enemy, but now it was real. She turned to Daniel. "Are we ready?" she asked, her voice tight. He looked at the battlefield, scanning positions, movement, and terrain. "We are as ready as we can be," he said simply. "Follow my lead and trust the soldiers. They are ready too." The first clash began at the northern gate. Selaran soldiers met the enemy in open ground. The fighting was brutal, with soldiers on both sides falling quickly. Commanders struggled to keep order. Panic began to rise as enemy numbers overwhelmed the front lines. Lyra watched from a distance, her hands clenched. She had hoped for a smooth defense, but reality was different. Chaos ruled the battlefield. She felt fear creep into her chest. Could they survive this? Could her people survive? Daniel moved to the front lines, calmly observing. He did not fight yet. Instead, he assessed the battlefield, noting where soldiers hesitated, where the enemy had weaknesses, and where his own troops could take advantage. Then, with a quiet command, he began to direct small groups. He moved like a shadow among them, correcting positions, coordinating attacks, and using the terrain to protect the weaker soldiers. He was everywhere at once, calm, focused, precise. Soldiers began to follow him, trusting his guidance even as they fought for their lives. Lyra watched in awe as he acted. He did not shout, he did not panic, yet the soldiers moved as if by magic. They formed lines, took positions, and countered enemy attacks with skill that seemed beyond their experience. Daniel's voice was calm but firm, giving instructions that made sense instantly. The enemy pressed forward, thinking they could crush the Selaran forces, but Daniel anticipated every move. He redirected soldiers, set traps, and used the terrain to turn the enemy's strength against them. Slowly, the tide began to shift. At one point, an enemy commander led a charge to break the left flank. The Selaran soldiers began to fall back under pressure. Lyra's heart pounded. She feared the flank would collapse, opening a path to the city. Then Daniel ran forward, moving quickly through the battlefield. He positioned soldiers in key points, taking advantage of hills, trees, and rocks. He fired a weapon with precise timing, knocking out the enemy commander. The soldiers followed his lead, striking together. The enemy faltered. The left flank held. Lyra could hardly believe her eyes. This human she had married was doing what no Selaran could have done alone. The battle raged through the day. Smoke and fire covered the fields. Soldiers shouted, weapons clashed, and explosions rocked the ground. Yet through it all, Daniel remained calm. He moved through the chaos, guiding, correcting, and inspiring. Soldiers who had been on the verge of panic now fought with focus and confidence. They moved as one, coordinated and effective. Lyra felt a mixture of fear, awe, and relief. She realized that this human was not only brave, but also terrifyingly skilled. He did not fight with anger, but with understanding. Every move he made seemed to anticipate the enemy's next step. At midday, the enemy launched a massive attack on the central gate. This was the main entry point, and if it fell, the city would be lost. Lyra watched in horror as enemy forces pressed forward. The Selaran defenders struggled. Daniel stepped forward, surveying the area quickly. He called out orders, moving with soldiers to critical points. He used simple commands, but the soldiers acted instantly. He fired at targets with precise timing, directing soldiers to block, push, and strike. Every action he took changed the flow of battle. Lyra felt fear melt into amazement. She had never seen anyone fight like this. As the day continued, Daniel began to push the enemy back. He combined defensive strategies with small counterattacks, using both skill and surprise. Soldiers began to fight with new confidence, taking risks they would never have attempted before. The enemy faltered, unable to anticipate the moves. Even their commanders seemed confused by the speed and intelligence of Selara's defense. Lyra realized that this human was more than a leader. He was a force of nature, a weapon of strategy and skill. Her respect and awe grew, but so did her fear. She knew that without him, they would have been defeated. During the battle, a group of soldiers became trapped near the eastern wall. Enemy forces surrounded them, cutting off escape. Lyra feared they would be lost. Then Daniel appeared, moving faster than she thought possible. He directed reinforcements, creating a path for the trapped soldiers to escape. He did not pause even when under fire. He moved with precision, every step calculated. By the time the enemy realized what was happening, the soldiers had escaped, and the enemy had taken heavy losses. Lyra could only stare. The human she had married was not ordinary, he was extraordinary. As the sun began to set, the battlefield was a mix of smoke, fire, and scattered soldiers. The enemy forces, once confident, began to retreat. The Celaran soldiers, exhausted but alive, held the city. Lyra stood on the balcony, looking down at the field. Her heart pounded. She had witnessed something she could hardly believe. Daniel, the human she had married to save her people, had turned a hopeless situation into a victory. He had done it not with rage or brute force, but with control, strategy, and understanding. After the battle, Lyra approached him. His clothes were scorched, his hands scratched, but his eyes were calm. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling slightly, I did not know humans could be like this. I did not know one man could change the fate of a city." He looked at her, calm and steady. "Queen Lyra," he said softly, "humans survive because we learn, adapt, and do not give up. Today, we survive together. Tomorrow, we prepare for what comes next." She nodded, trying to understand the depth of his words. She realized that she had married someone whose power was beyond anything she could imagine. He was not just strong, he was brilliant, and he had saved her people. The council gathered later to discuss the battle. Commanders reported that the first enemy strike had been repelled, with minimal losses compared to what they had feared. Soldiers praised Daniel quietly, no longer mocking, but admiring. The council members who had doubted him before now looked at him with respect and cautious awe. Lyra watched the meeting quietly. She realized that the human she had married was now central to their survival, not just for this battle, but for the war that was to come. Her fear had turned into respect, and respect into something more complicated. She did not fully understand it yet, but she knew she could trust him, and that trust was rare. That night, Lyra walked through the palace gardens, thinking about the day's events. Daniel joined her as always. "Today was only the beginning," he said quietly. "The enemy will return stronger and more prepared. We must be ready." She nodded, knowing he was right. She looked at him, thinking about the man she had married, the human who had come to save her people. She realized that she had underestimated humans and underestimated him. He had power beyond physical strength, power in knowledge, skill, and calm control. She felt both awe and fear for what was to come. In the days that followed, Daniel continued to train the soldiers, refine strategies, and study enemy movements. He moved among the people, quietly observing and correcting mistakes. Soldiers began to speak of him in whispers, calling him a master of battle, a leader unlike any they had known. Lyra listened and watched, understanding that she had chosen wisely. She had married this human to save her people, but she now realized that he might save much more than that. He might change the future of Celara forever. The first battle had been won, but Lyra knew it was only the start. The enemy fleet was larger, stronger, and more determined than before. Yet she felt hope, something she had not felt in weeks. With Daniel by her side, she believed that survival was possible. She had married a human for duty, but she had witnessed his astounding power in battle. And in that power, she saw the beginning of a new future for her people, one that might finally lead to safety, and perhaps even victory. The city of Celara was quiet after the battle. Smoke rose from the outskirts, and the wounded were being carried into makeshift hospitals. Lyra walked through the streets, seeing her people for the first time after the attack. Some smiled, some cried, and some looked tired beyond words. She felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Many lives had been lost, but the city had survived. And behind that survival was the human she had married, Daniel. She thought about how he had moved through the battlefield, calm and precise, and she wondered how one person could carry so much strength. Daniel worked tirelessly even after the fighting stopped. He organized patrols, reinforced defenses, and spoke with the soldiers who had survived the battle. He moved from group to group, correcting mistakes, showing new ways to fight, and offering encouragement. He never seemed tired, never seemed afraid. Lyra watched him from the palace balcony, realizing that she had never seen anyone like him before. He was not just a soldier, he was a teacher, a guide, and a leader. She felt a strange mix of pride, respect, and curiosity. The human she had married was changing her people in ways she had never imagined. The next morning, Daniel called a meeting of the council and the commanders. They gathered in the command chamber, maps and reports spread across the table. "We learned today," he said quietly, "that the enemy is strong and relentless. They will come again, and we must be ready. Celera cannot survive on luck alone. We must train, plan, and fight smarter than ever before." The commanders listened carefully, some skeptical but most respectful. Daniel's calm authority carried weight. He did not demand obedience, he earned it. He divided the soldiers into small groups and worked with each one personally. He taught them to observe the enemy, to anticipate attacks, and to coordinate with others. He showed them how to use cover, how to communicate silently, and how to retreat safely when needed. He emphasized patience and awareness. The soldiers were amazed at his skill. Some whispered among themselves that he seemed almost impossible, as if he could see the future of a battle before it happened. Lyra noticed the change in her people. Fear was being replaced by confidence, and hope was returning to their hearts. Lyra herself began to learn from him. She spent hours with Daniel in strategy sessions, asking questions about the enemy and about human methods of fighting. He explained things simply, showing her how humans survived in situations that seemed hopeless. "Humans do not fight with anger or pride," he said. "We fight with understanding, patience, and adaptation. We survive because we do not panic. We do not assume the enemy will always act the same way. We learn, we change, and we act." Lyra listened carefully, trying to absorb every word. She had always thought humans were fragile, but now she understood that their strength was in their mind as much as their body. As the days passed, skirmishes began on the borders of Celera. Small groups of enemy forces attacked mining settlements, patrols, and supply lines. Daniel responded quickly, leading the soldiers with precision. Each encounter was a test, and each time the Celerans began to hold their ground. Soldiers who had once been afraid now moved with confidence. They followed Daniel's guidance, striking with coordination and skill. Lyra watched from the palace towers, amazed at how one human had transformed her people in just a few days. She realized that the survival of Celera was no longer a matter of chance. It was a matter of training, strategy, and the presence of this extraordinary man. One evening, Lyra walked through the training grounds where Daniel was working with a group of young soldiers. They practiced maneuvers and drills under his watchful eye. He moved among them, correcting posture, timing, and coordination. He demonstrated techniques himself, moving with speed and control that left the soldiers staring in awe. Lyra approached him quietly. "Daniel," she said softly, "your strength is more than physical. I have never seen anything like it. You do not just fight, you teach, guide, and inspire. How do you do it?" He looked at her calmly. "Queen Lyra, humans survive because we understand fear and use it. We do not let panic control us. We adapt, learn, and act. That is our strength. Today, I teach your soldiers to survive, not just to fight." Lyra nodded, thinking about how much she had underestimated humans. She had married him to save her people, but now she realized that he was changing them in ways she could not have imagined. He was teaching them confidence, discipline, and strategy. He was giving them hope. She felt a deep gratitude and something more complicated growing quietly in her heart. She realized that she was learning to trust him completely, not just as a commander, but as a partner in a struggle that went beyond simple survival. Over the next few days, Daniel trained the Celeran soldiers relentlessly. He introduced new formations, new communication methods, and new ways to observe the enemy. He emphasized teamwork, patience, and adaptability. Soldiers who had once been fearful and scattered now moved with precision, covering each other, coordinating attacks, and retreating when necessary. Lyra saw the transformation clearly. Her people were becoming stronger, more confident, and more capable. The human she had married had turned desperation into hope. As they prepared for a larger enemy attack, Daniel focused on strategy. He studied reports, examined terrain, and anticipated enemy movements. He coordinated with Celeran commanders, teaching them how to think like humans in battle, how to adapt quickly, how to read patterns, and how to act decisively. Lyra participated, learning every day, understanding the power that humans could bring to war. She felt pride in her people and in the human she had married. She knew that when the enemy returned in full force, Celera would be ready in a way it had never been before. One afternoon, a young soldier approached Lyra quietly. "Queen Lyra," he said nervously, "Daniel's methods, they work. I have never felt so confident in my life. We can hold the city. We can win." Lyra smiled faintly. She had heard this from many soldiers, but it still warmed her heart. She realized that the human she had married had not only saved lives, but had inspired a whole generation of warriors. Hope had returned to Selara, and fear had begun to fade. That night, Lyra and Daniel walked through the quiet palace gardens. The stars shone above, and the city was calm for the moment. "Daniel," she said softly, "I married you to save my people. I did not know then what you would truly bring. You are not just strong, you are something more. You teach, you lead, and you inspire." "I have never seen anything like it." He looked at her calmly, as he always did. "Queen Lyra, I do what I must to protect your people. Strength is not just about fighting. It is about understanding, adapting, and helping others to survive. Today we have prepared them for what is to come. Tomorrow we fight again." The days turned into weeks. Selara became stronger under Daniel's guidance. Soldiers moved with confidence, commanders communicated efficiently, and civilians began to feel safe. Even neighboring cities noticed the change. Small reports arrived that the enemy's attacks were less successful, that Selara's defenses were holding, and that morale was rising. Lyra realized that the human she had married had given them more than survival. He had given them the power to resist, to fight, and perhaps to win. Lyra spent hours with him in strategy sessions, learning the ways of human thinking in war. She realized that human strength was different from Selaran strength. It was not just speed, agility, or power. It was patience, discipline, observation, and adaptability. She understood why he had survived impossible battles before arriving on Selara. He had learned to act when others panicked, to find opportunities when others saw only danger. She felt awe, respect, and a quiet fear for the enemy yet to come. She knew that the final test was approaching. One morning, scouts reported a large enemy fleet approaching from the outer system. This was no small attack, it was a full strike. Lyra called a meeting with Daniel and the commanders. He studied the reports carefully. "This will be the largest attack yet," he said calmly. "We are ready, your soldiers are ready. We have trained, prepared, and adapted. Now we act with precision and confidence." Lyra listened, feeling the weight of the coming battle, but also a spark of hope. She had seen what Daniel could do, and she knew that under his guidance, Selara had a chance. As the sun rose over Selara, the city was quiet but alert. Soldiers moved into position, ships were ready, and the people watched nervously. Lyra stood on the palace balcony, looking at Daniel as he coordinated defenses. She thought about how far they had come since the first attack. The human she had married had transformed Selara from a frightened city into a strong, prepared force. She felt pride, trust, and a deep respect. The coming battle would be dangerous, but she knew that with him they had a chance. The survival of Selara was no longer uncertain. It was possible, and perhaps victory was within reach. The enemy fleet approached Selara in full force. The sky above the city darkened as ships moved like shadows, engines glowing red. Alarms rang across the city. Civilians took shelter and soldiers took their positions. Lyra stood on the palace balcony looking at the horizon. Her heart pounded, but she felt a strange calm as she watched Daniel move among the soldiers. He was precise, calm, and focused, giving orders and coordinating positions. His presence alone seemed to steady the nervous soldiers. She had seen his skill before, but today would be the ultimate test. Daniel surveyed the battlefield from the command tower. He examined enemy formations, noting their speed, numbers, and weaknesses. He spoke quietly to the commanders. "Remember your training. Move as one, observe the enemy, and act with confidence. Do not panic. We have prepared for this. Trust each other and follow my lead." The commanders nodded, understanding that his guidance was different from anything they had known. His calmness inspired confidence, and his skill gave them hope. Soldiers watched him with awe. They had trained under him for weeks, and now they were ready to fight as he had taught them. The battle began suddenly. Enemy ships fired at the outskirts, targeting supply depots and defense towers. Selara's forces responded quickly, moving with coordination and skill. Soldiers followed the movements Daniel had drilled into them. They communicated silently, advanced and retreated as needed, and took advantage of cover and terrain. The enemy was strong, but they had not expected the Selaran forces to fight with such precision. Panic began to creep into their ranks. The soldiers of Selara were moving like one, striking at the enemy with coordination that left them unprepared. Lyra watched the battle unfold from above, her hands clenched. She saw soldiers falling, but more soldiers advancing, protecting each other and striking in unison. She realized that Daniel had not only trained them, he had transformed them. The human she had married had given her people confidence, strategy, and hope. Every movement, every command, and every calculation seemed to anticipate the enemy's actions. Lyra's awe grew, and with it, a small pride in what her people could achieve with guidance and trust. The enemy launched a massive assault on the central city gate. Celera's soldiers struggled under the pressure, and Lyra's heart raced. Then Daniel moved through the battlefield like a shadow. He directed soldiers to key points, set traps, and used terrain to divide the enemy forces. His actions were precise and calculated. He fired at targets with perfect timing, and his soldiers followed his lead without hesitation. Slowly, the tide began to turn. The enemy faltered, confused by the unexpected strength and coordination of Celera's forces. At one point, an enemy commander led a group of elite soldiers to break the eastern wall. The Celeran defenders were overwhelmed, and Lyra feared the city might fall. Then Daniel appeared, moving faster than anyone had thought possible. He positioned soldiers strategically, countered the enemy attack, and personally fought to hold the line. His movements were controlled, calm, and devastatingly effective. Soldiers began to rally behind him, striking together with precision. The enemy, once confident, now faced organized resistance they had not anticipated. The eastern wall held. Lyra saw the transformation in her people. Soldiers who had once feared battle now moved with confidence. They followed Daniel's commands, advanced with courage, and protected each other. The enemy forces began to retreat in disorder. Explosions shook the ground, and fire burned across the fields, but Celera's soldiers pressed forward. The human she had married had changed the outcome of the battle. His calm, skillful leadership turned desperation into hope, chaos into order, and fear into courage. Daniel continued to coordinate attacks, moving from point to point. He used simple commands, but his understanding of strategy and human skill made every action effective. Soldiers began to fight with new strength, inspired by his presence. Lyra watched as enemy forces were pushed back, retreating toward their ships. The battlefield had shifted completely. What had begun as an overwhelming attack had become a decisive victory for Celera. Lyra felt a mix of awe, relief, and admiration. The human she had married had not only saved her city, but had turned the tide of war. As the enemy retreated, Celera's soldiers pursued, cutting off small groups and capturing supplies. The city had survived, but the victory was not without cost. Wounded were carried away, fires were extinguished, and soldiers took a moment to breathe. Lyra walked among them, seeing the pride and relief in their eyes. She realized that her people had grown stronger, braver, and more confident. They had learned to trust each other, and they had learned to trust the human who had guided them. Daniel's influence had changed Celera forever. After the battle, Lyra approached Daniel. His clothes were torn, his hands scratched, but his eyes were calm as ever. "Daniel," she said softly, "I knew humans could be strong, but I never imagined this. You have saved my people, and you have changed them. I do not know how to thank you." He looked at her quietly. "Queen Lyra, you married me to save your people. We have done more than survive. We have fought together, trained together, and prepared for the future. This is not thanks. This is our work together." She nodded, feeling a deep respect, trust, and admiration for him. She understood that she had married someone extraordinary and that his strength was not just in his hands, but in his mind, his calm, and his guidance. The council gathered to discuss the battle and the next steps. Commanders reported minimal losses compared to what they had feared. Soldiers praised Daniel quietly, no longer doubting but admiring. Lyra watched in silence as the human she had married became central to every plan. His calm presence, intelligence, and skill had saved their city and transformed their people. Lyra realized that she had chosen wisely, not only for the survival of Celera, but for its future. Daniel had given them more than victory. He had given them strength and hope. As the city recovered, Daniel continued to train soldiers and refine strategies. He emphasized observation, teamwork, patience, and adaptability. Soldiers moved with precision, confidence, and coordination. Lyra spent time learning from him, understanding human methods of battle, survival, and leadership. She realized that human strength was different from Celeran strength. It was not only speed or power, it was discipline, awareness, and the ability to adapt to any situation. She felt awe at his knowledge and skill, and a quiet pride that he had chosen to stand with her people. Weeks passed, and Solara began to rebuild. The city was stronger, soldiers were more skilled, and civilians felt safer. News reached them that the enemy had suffered heavy losses and would hesitate to attack again. Lyra understood that their survival was no longer uncertain. The human she had married had transformed her people into a force capable of defending themselves and thriving. She walked through the city, seeing soldiers training, children playing safely, and civilians returning to their work. Hope had returned, stronger than ever. One evening, Lyra and Daniel stood on the palace balcony looking at the city below. The sun set, painting the sky in orange and gold. "Daniel," she said softly, "we have survived, and more than that, we have grown stronger. You have given my people hope and strength. I married you to save them, but I realize now that you have given them more than survival. You have given them a future." He looked at her, calm and quiet. "Queen Lyra, we have done it together. I stand with your people because it is right and because it is my choice. Survival is not enough. Strength, unity, and trust make a future possible. We have built that together." Lyra felt a warmth in her chest. She understood that their bond had grown beyond duty. They had married for survival, but now they shared trust, respect, and a deep understanding. The human she had married had shown her courage, skill, and leadership beyond anything she had imagined. He had turned fear into hope and despair into strength. She realized that she did not only admire him, she trusted him completely, and that trust was rare and powerful. As the days turned into months, Solara continued to grow stronger. Soldiers trained under Daniel's guidance, learning human methods alongside their own. The city became a model of defense, strategy, and resilience. Neighboring systems took notice, and the name of Solara became known not as a weak world, but as a rising power capable of defending itself and thriving under intelligent leadership. Lyra knew that this was only possible because of the human she had married, the man who had chosen to stand with her people and teach them strength. Lyra and Daniel spent time together quietly, walking through the city, overseeing training, and talking about the future. They shared thoughts, ideas, and plans. Their bond had grown beyond survival. It was built on trust, respect, and shared struggle. Lyra knew that she had married for duty, but she had found a partner, a guide, and a protector. She felt pride, admiration, and quiet joy. The human who had saved her city had also changed her heart. The enemy never returned in full force. Their attacks became smaller, less coordinated, and eventually stopped. Solara had survived the greatest threat it had ever faced. Soldiers stood ready, civilians thrived, and the city rebuilt stronger than before. Lyra understood that this future had been won not only by bravery, but by skill, discipline, and the guidance of the human she had married. She realized that she had made a choice that would echo for generations. Daniel had not only saved her people, he had changed their world forever. Standing together on the palace balcony, looking at the city bathed in sunlight, Lyra felt hope and pride. She turned to Daniel and smiled. "We have done it," she said softly. "Your strength, guidance, and courage have given Solara a future. I knew humans were strong, but you have shown me something beyond belief." He looked at her calmly, his voice quiet but steady. "Queen Lyra, we did it together. I stand with your people because it is right, because it is my choice. The future is ours to protect, and we will do it together." She nodded, feeling trust, pride, and something deeper in her heart. She had married to save her people, but in the process, she had witnessed astounding power, learned trust, and found a bond that could not be broken. The story of Solara changed forever. The city survived, the people thrived, and the human who had come to help became a legend. Lyra knew that she had made the right choice, that she had married not only to save her people, but to witness the power, skill, and courage of a human who had proven himself beyond doubt. Daniel had transformed her world, her people, and even her heart. Solara had hope, strength, and a future, all because she had trusted him, and he had chosen to fight for them. The galaxy would never forget the story of the city that survived, and the human who led them to victory.